today's video, and I'll be discussing determinants of PED, and this is brought to you by Economics Made Easy. But wait a minute, what is that abbreviation there, PED, that word in purple? Well, that actually stands for price elasticity of demand, and we've already discussed this in a previous video where I covered the range of PED values, but I can go quickly over it just so you guys still understand from this video itself. So PED is basically a measure of responsiveness of the quantity demanded for a good with respect to a change in its price. And there's a formula for calculating PED. It's the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price. Alright, so that's a little bit of clarity. And now when it actually comes to those range of PED values, if the PED value is less than 1 but greater than 0, it's going to be price inelastic. The demand is price inelastic when the PED is greater than 1. The demand is unit elastic when the PED is equal to 1. And demand is perfectly inelastic when PED is equal to 0. And lastly, demand is perfectly elastic when PED is equal to infinity. Now all of these things have different meanings, and I do cover this in the other video as well, and I don't want to be very repetitive. So overall, that's basically what you need to know, so let's get right into it. So, these are the determinants I'll be explaining today. So I hope it makes a lot of sense. Alright, so let's start with number and closeness of substitutes. Now, if a good has more substitutes, the demand is going to be more elastic. And if a good has less substitutes, well, the demand is going to be less elastic. And if the price of a good with many substitutes increases, consumers can always switch to other substitute products, therefore resulting in a relatively large drop. And then this comes back to that word, large responsiveness in quantity demanded. And you can see this in the world very often because there's a lot of different brands. For example, with toothpaste, you have cars, you have water bottles. Almost a lot of the things you see in the world have so many substitutes. So the moment you increase or decrease the price, there's that much of a responsiveness in the quantity demanded. Because we also assume in a lot of cases in economics that all the stakeholders have perfect information. So it's really important that we kind of grasp that concept. But now if a good or service has few or no substitutes, an example of this is gasoline, then an increase in price will bring forth a relatively small drop in quantity demanded. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense, but we can try to understand this concept more with example time. So here we have the market of food. Oh my god. And by food I just mean any common groceries which are bought very often. So as you can see here, the demand is relatively inelastic, and you can see that as the demand line is very steep as well, which you can clearly see. And now if you notice, even when the price is increasing by a relatively large amount or decreasing from a relatively large amount, when we actually see that the price is increasing here from P to P2 now, so you see the upward increase. When we actually go here, you see that the quantity demanded barely decreases, if you can see that. And then when the price decreases from P to P1, you can see that the quantity per week consumed of this good, while I'm following the axis, just increases barely from Q to Q1. So that really puts it into perspective, and you can do this with another example like gasoline, which I mentioned before. Okay, and then we can go to this next diagram. So this is a market of cars. As you know, there's a huge number of substitutes when it comes to cars. You have BMW, you have, I'm not going to go through all the brands, but you get the gist. So now you can actually see that the demand curve is much more flatter than this. I'm not going to use the word flat because we of course know that there's a separate diagram for that, but you can see that it's relatively more flat. So you can see that even when there's a small change in price, almost the exact same, if you just check the length, it's literally the exact same. You can see that the quantity demanded changes immensely when you just raise the price by a little bit, because consumers can actually see those other substitutes as well. And with the more substitutes, there's a larger variety. You'll see changes in quality as well, offers, etc. So all of those factors come into play. So I hope that sheds a bit more clarity into this diagram. And if this was an exam setting and you really wanted to delve in and analyze this diagram, for example, if we just want to analyze this first diagram, you would go, this diagram illustrates the downward sloping demand curve of food, which is a primary commodity. And this is a question that actually comes up quite often in IB. It usually explains to you why, the question usually goes, explain why primary commodities will have a low elasticity, whereas manufactured goods will have a high elasticity. So this is kind of those 15-mark questions you're looking at. But let's continue with the analysis. So we could say the demand curve is downward sloping, highlighting the negative relationship between price and the quantity demanded. I'm basically just stating the law of demand. It's not very necessary, but then actually analyzing the diagram, we can see here itself that when the price of the good increases from P to P2, there's a movement along the demand curve from Q to Q2, and this actually highlights a contraction. However, this movement is minimal, as I mentioned before, and this can be seen in this diagram as well. And this minimal movement can also be observed when there's an extension in the demand curve. So here contraction, here extension. So that's usually how you analyze that. And then lastly, it's very important to say, if the PED was to be calculated, then the numerator would be less than the denominator, where the percentage change in quantity demanded is less than the percentage change in price, which means that the PED is less than 1. Yes, you understood. So I went very heavy into that analysis, but I do hope it actually makes a lot of sense. So now, moving on to the next determinant is luxuries versus necessities. So, necessities are basically the goods we consider essential or necessary in our lives. So food, water, shelter. Luxuries, so these are neither necessary nor essential in our lives. An example are is a luxury watch. For example, you don't really need it. It's not essential. So there's a lot of necessities and luxuries out there. So I don't need to explain that too much. But now the main point is, of course, that the demand for necessities is less elastic than demand for luxuries. Now, for example, the demand for medications, for example, tend to be very inelastic because people's actually, their life depends on it. So even if you're put in a predicament where your state of health is really bad and you need to pay for a medical expense which is very expensive, you're most likely still going to pay for it because it's a life or that scenario. But now let's say you're trying to buy a luxury, let's say a Rolex watch, for example. If the price increases by, let's say, $5,000, you're not gonna buy that Rolex if you're in a normal class or a lower class, for example. Maybe even if you're in a higher class, because it might feel so unnecessary. But when you're put in that predicament where something or a good or service is actually a necessity, your entire mind, it changes. So this is why for example, on the other hand, the demand for diamond rings is elastic because most people view them as luxury. So I think that makes a bit more sense. But now we get into something interesting. A special case is addictive goods. So basically, the greater the addiction, the more inelastic the good. And we can see a lot of real world examples around this, which is when people actually impose taxes on goods that are quite addictive. You can see this by UK alcohol duty taxes, for example. You have Singapore and UK sugar drink tax. So these are all attacking negative externality of consumption. It's a concept that I will explain to you guys later, but that's just shedding a bit of light. And that actually, one of the limitations in some of those policies actually gets back to PED. So it's a very interesting concept. So just to make that clear, the greater the degree of addiction to a substance like alcohol, cigarettes, so on, the more inelastic the demand. So a price increase will not bring forth a significant reduction in quantity demanded if one is actually severely addicted. Now, moving on to the third determinant, it's time period. So the longer the time period in which a consumer makes a purchasing decision, the more elastic the demand. And this is basically because as time goes by, consumers have the opportunity to consider whether they really want the good and to also get the information on the availability of alternatives of the good in question. So consumers can actually take this time. If you're going into a store and you see the price of a certain good, if it's in the long run, you can go around, look at all the other stores. Let's see, what is the price looking at? Is this the best possible best offer that I have? And an example of this is the price of heating oil, as consumers can do little to switch to other forms of heating in a short period of time. And then of course, like I said, another example was your gasoline as well. So these are all some examples. So yeah, I think that makes a little bit of sense. And also in the short run, consumers actually don't have the time to deliberate on a lot of things. And this is a way a lot of marketing gets you. For example, if you're shopping, it says online 5 minutes before the discount goes away, right? You see that 5 minutes and then you start to panic. You make a lot of decisions when you're panic buying. It's a strategy used, and if you, in the long run, you could have actually probably checked, and you would have probably noticed that there were a lot of better options. And yeah, that's a little bit of a real world application. So I hope that makes sense. So the fourth determinant and the last determinant we're going to discuss in this video is the proportion of income spent on the good. So the larger the proportion of one's income needed to buy the good, the more elastic the demand. So an item like a pen or a water bottle takes up a very small proportion of one's income, whereas a car or that expensive watch I was talking about takes up a much larger proportion. So for the same increase in the price of those pens or the bottles and in the price of that car or that watch, the response in the quantity demanded is likely to be greater than in the case of that bottle or the pen. You get me? So I think these determinants are very easy to remember, and you just have to really think about them in a really easy way. And I feel like it will be really helpful if you can actually make an acronym with these. So an acronym, it's like PD, price elasticity of demand. It's an official acronym, but you can always make an acronym that actually works for you. So like one that a lot of students use is SPLAT. So that would be substitutes, proportion of income, length of time, addictive goods, time period. So those are a little bit of the acronyms, and I try to use it as much as possible because it actually really helps me remember those determinants in very key exam situations, and it's almost like I unlock a new part in my brain during that exam when I really need it. But overall, thank you for listening, and of course credit to SlidesGo for letting me use their presentation. It's very high quality as always, and yeah, thank you for watching.